Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Tuesday, March 31st, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today will reach 77.3 degrees, while the low is expected to settle at 64.5. It is Cesar Chavez Day, a time to honor the legacy of the labor leader and civil rights activist. On today's show, we are examining the intensifying situation between the United States and Iran as we approach the April 6 deadline. We will also investigate why American drivers are facing prices at the pump that have now climbed beyond $4 a gallon. Along with those top stories, we have a variety of other updates to keep you informed on what is happening in the world today. All of this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We start this morning with a dangerous escalation in the Persian Gulf. Overnight, an Iranian drone struck a fully loaded Kuwaiti oil tanker anchored just off the coast of Dubai. This comes as the month-long conflict between the U.S. and Iran pushes the region closer to all-out war. Ethan has been following every development. Ethan, what do we know about this strike?
So just after midnight local time today, an Iranian one-way attack drone hit the Al Salmi on its starboard side. The Al Salmi is a very large crude carrier built back in 2011, and it was sitting in Anchorage E of Dubai Port, about 31 nautical miles northwest of the city. Al Jazeera and the Dubai government media office confirmed a significant fire broke out, and there was hull damage. The good news is all 24 crew members were rescued safely, and firefighting teams had the blaze out by this morning.
2 million barrels of oil on board. Was there any spillage into the Gulf?
That was the immediate fear. The Kuwait Petroleum Corporation initially put out warnings about a possible leak, but authorities have since confirmed there's no oil in the water, which is a huge relief given how ecologically fragile the Gulf is. That cargo, by the way, was worth over $200 million. It was sourced from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and headed for Qingdao, China.
I understand the ship actually tried to signal it was carrying Chinese cargo to avoid being targeted.
Yeah, this is a really telling detail about how desperate commercial shipping has become. The Al Salmi was broadcasting the words, quote, China Cargo CNQDG, end quote, on its automatic identification system. That's a tactic merchant vessels use to signal neutrality, essentially waving a flag saying, don't shoot, this belongs to a major power. But it clearly didn't work, and that sends a chilling message to every tanker captain operating in the Gulf right now.
And this wasn't the only attack overnight, was it?
Not even close. The UAE Ministry of Defense says it intercepted 11 ballistic missiles and 27 drones launched from Iran in a massive coordinated barrage. Most were neutralized, but debris from intercepted projectiles wounded 4 Asian nationals in a residential neighborhood in Dubai. The National and Fox 12 Oregon, citing the Associated Press, also reported that Saudi Arabia intercepted 10 drones and 8 ballistic missiles, with 2 injuries in Al-Kharj province.
Were other countries hit as well?
Israel and Bahrain both faced separate missile barrages and had air raid sirens going off. Explosions were reported near Erbil International Airport in Iraq, and at sea, a Greek-owned container ship was targeted near Ras Tanura. Search crews are still looking for 3 missing sailors from the Mayuri Nuri, a Thai cargo vessel that was disabled earlier this month. So you're looking at a conflict that's touching virtually every corner of the region right now.
For listeners just catching up, how did this whole thing start?
It goes back to February 28th, so roughly 1 month ago today. According to Al Monitor and The Washington Post, a joint U.S.-Israeli operation codenamed Operation Epic Fury carried out a decapitation strike in Tehran. It killed Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei at his residence, along with several top officials, including the Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That single strike essentially blew the lid off decades of simmering hostility.
And Iran has new leadership now. How has that changed things?
On March 8th, the Assembly of Experts elected Khamenei's son, Mujtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader. Under his leadership, Iran has gone on a full retaliatory footing, striking U.S. bases and targeting international shipping. The U.S. responded with a devastating hit on Isfahan, one of Iran's primary nuclear enrichment sites. Satellite imagery showed a massive fireball. So each side keeps raising the stakes, and there's no off-ramp in sight.
What's this doing to energy markets? I know people are feeling it at the pump.
It's been brutal. Iran essentially has a chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz, and about 20% of the world's oil passes through that waterway. Brent crude has surged toward $116 a barrel, which is nearly a 60% jump in just 1 month. Here at home, gasoline has crossed $4 a gallon. For context, we haven't seen prices spike this fast since the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
And the human toll in just a single month is staggering.
Over 3,000 lives lost already. The Washington Post reports roughly 1,900 deaths in Iran and 1,200 in Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been drawn into the fighting. Israel has reported 19 deaths, 13 U.S. service members have been killed. And just recently, 3 United Nations peacekeepers died in southern Lebanon during an Israeli ground operation against Hezbollah. Those peacekeeper deaths in particular have drawn sharp international backlash.
So where do diplomatic efforts stand right now?
President Trump has drawn a hard line. According to the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, he's issued a deadline of April 6th, so just 6 days from now. Through Pakistani intermediaries, the U.S. delivered a 15-point peace proposal to Tehran. The key demands include zero uranium enrichment and dismantling nuclear facilities, a 5-year halt to Iran's ballistic missile program, and the immediate permanent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
And if Iran doesn't agree by April 6th?
Trump has threatened to, quote, completely obliterate, end quote, Iran's energy infrastructure. That means Karg Island, which handles 90% of Iran's oil exports, plus the national electric grid and desalination plants. The desalination piece is especially alarming because millions of Iranian civilians depend on those facilities for drinking water. It's not a subtle threat. It's a promise of total economic destruction.
Has there been any pushback on targeting civilian infrastructure like that?
Significant pushback. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have both warned that striking water and power systems indispensable to civilian survival would constitute a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed, quote, deep concern, end quote, saying such strikes would cause disproportionate harm to millions of civilians. So there's a growing tension between what the administration says it's willing to do and what international law actually permits.
China had cargo on that tanker. How is Beijing responding to all of this?
Very carefully. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed, quote, deep concern, end quote, about the Al-Salmi attack, but notably refused to name Iran as the one responsible. The Global Times reports that Beijing has rejected Trump's calls to join a multinational Hormuz coalition. Instead, China is coordinating independently with Tehran and has sent a special envoy to pursue what it's calling a diplomatic exit. So Beijing is threading a needle, protecting its energy interests without backing Washington's military campaign.
Is there any sign that back-channel talks could produce a deal before that April 6th deadline?
President Trump claims, quote, great progress, end quote, is being made in conversations with Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Kalibaf. But the fundamental gap is enormous. The U.S. is demanding Iran give up its nuclear program and its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran sees those as core sovereign assets, especially now under a new leader who needs to project strength. Unless something dramatic shifts in the next 6 days, the risk of total regional collapse remains at its highest point in modern history.
A lot to watch this week, Ethan. Thank you for walking us through all of that.
Of course, Grace.
We want to turn now to the other major story hitting American wallets this morning. Gas prices have officially crossed the $4 mark nationwide for the first time in more than 3 years. Chloe has been tracking this one closely. Chloe, how bad are the numbers right now?
Pretty stunning, Grace. As of yesterday, the national average hit $4 and about 2 cents a gallon, according to CNBC and CNN Business. That's a nearly 35% jump in just 1 month, which is a price shock worse than what we saw after Hurricane Katrina or during the early months of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it's not just gasoline. CBS News reports diesel has surged over 40% to about $5.45 a gallon, and that matters because diesel powers the trucks, trains, and ships that move basically everything we buy.
So when does that diesel spike start showing up in everyday prices at the store?
Experts are saying as early as this month. CBS News quoted analysts warning of serious sticker shock at supermarkets and on online orders starting in April. KPMG chief economist Diane Swank told CBS that transportation costs are already climbing across the board. Airline tickets are going up, shipping fees are going up, and UPS is reportedly seeking a temporary 8% surcharge just to cover fuel. It's one of those situations where the pain at the pump is really just the first wave.
And the root cause here is the military conflict in the Middle East. Can you walk listeners through what happened?
Sure. On February 28th, so roughly a month ago, the U.S. and Israel launched a joint military strike on Iran. The American side called it Operation Epic Fury, and the Israeli side called it Operation Roaring Lion. According to multiple reports, there were nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours alone, targeting Iranian leadership, nuclear infrastructure, and missile sites. The initial wave killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. It was a massive, coordinated operation, and it fundamentally changed the security picture in the region overnight.
And Iran's response was to shut down a critical oil route?
Exactly. Iran moved to effectively close the Strait of Hormuz, which is the narrow waterway that previously handled about 20% of the world's oil supply. The International Energy Agency has called this the biggest oil supply disruption in history. Gulf Arab producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are literally running out of storage space because they can't get their crude onto tankers and out to market. Brent crude peaked at around $126 a barrel, and U.S. crude settled above $100 a barrel for the first time since July of 2022.
Now, there's been real debate about whether the strike was justified in the first place. What are critics saying?
This is where it gets really complicated. The Trump administration justified the strikes by citing an imminent nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile threat from Iran. But NPR and CBS News reported that just 24 hours before the attack, Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi announced what he called a historic breakthrough. He said Iran had agreed to a zero stockpiling policy for enriched uranium with full international verification. So there was apparently a diplomatic deal on the table right before the bombs started falling.
And there are also questions about the missile threat itself?
There are. Critics have pointed to a 2025 Defense Intelligence Agency assessment called Golden Dome for America, which concluded Iran likely wouldn't have a militarily viable ICBM until 2035. That's nearly a decade away. Senator Mark Warner, who's the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said he saw, quote, no sign, end quote, of an imminent threat in classified briefings before the strike. That's led to accusations from several lawmakers that this was a war of choice aimed at regime change rather than a response to a genuine emergency.
Let's talk about what Americans are feeling right now at the pump. $4 is a big psychological number, isn't it?
It really is. CNN Business describes it as a psychological barrier for consumers. And one of the frustrating realities is that gas prices tend to rise like a rocket but fall like a feather. So even if the conflict ended tomorrow, analysts say relief would be slow to arrive. There's also a huge regional gap right now. California is already at $4.67. Washington State is at $4.38, Hawaii at $4.40. Meanwhile, Oklahoma and Mississippi are still under $3. But those states are seeing the fastest week-over-week increases, so they're catching up quickly.
So what is the government actually doing about this?
The administration has rolled out several moves at once. The biggest is a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, 172 million barrels of oil as part of a 30-nation coordinated effort to inject 400 million barrels into the global market. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced a temporary waiver on E15 gasoline, which is a 15% ethanol blend, to help boost supply. And there's a 60-day Jones Act waiver that allows foreign-flagged vessels to move oil between U.S. ports, which is specifically aimed at helping the West Coast and the Northeast, where supply bottlenecks are worst.
There's also a bill in Congress to suspend the federal gas tax. Where does that stand?
It's called the Gas Prices Relief Act of 2026, introduced by Senators Mark Kelly and Richard Blumenthal. It would suspend the 18.4-cent federal gas tax through October. But it's stalled in committee right now. The American Society of Civil Engineers and a number of Republican lawmakers have raised concerns about what that would do to the Highway Trust Fund, which pays for road and bridge repairs. So the math gets tricky. You're trading short-term relief at the pump for potentially underfunding infrastructure, and that's a tough vote for a lot of members.
What about at the state level? Are governors stepping in?
Georgia is the one state that's actually gotten something done so far. Governor Brian Kemp signed a measure on March 20th suspending the state's 33.3-cent gas tax for 60 days. Similar proposals have come up in Connecticut, Maryland, and Florida, but they've all been either rejected or shelved for now. So Georgia's really the outlier, and drivers there are seeing a small but real difference compared to neighboring states.
Let's look ahead. There's talk of possible peace negotiations. What do we know?
As of today, Pakistan has emerged as a potential mediator. Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar announced that Islamabad may host peace talks in the coming days, and that effort has the backing of Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. So there's a diplomatic track forming, and involves some serious regional players who have relationships with both sides. That's a hopeful sign, but the situation is extremely fragile right now.
And on the other side, President Trump doesn't sound like he's in a mood to wait for diplomacy.
Not at all. He's simultaneously ramped up his rhetoric, threatening to, quote, completely obliterate, end quote, Iranian civilian infrastructure, including power plants and desalination plants, if the Strait of Hormuz isn't reopened. Reports suggest he's set an informal deadline of April 6th, which is less than a week away. There are 2,500 Marines who recently arrived in the region, and U.S. and Israeli forces have now hit more than 13,000 targets. So the military pressure is intensifying, even as the diplomatic channel is trying to open.
If this drags on, how much worse could prices get?
Energy analysts are warning it could get significantly worse. Patrick DeHaan of GasBuddy has said that if the Strait of Hormuz blockade persists and the war escalates into strikes on civilian infrastructure, gasoline could easily reach $5 a gallon by the summer driving season. And remember, summer is when demand naturally spikes because of vacation travel, so the timing couldn't be worse. You're looking at a scenario where the conflict premium on oil meets peak seasonal demand, and that combination could make $4 look like the good old days.
That is a sobering thought heading into spring. Chloe, thank you for breaking all of that down for us this morning.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. NASA is officially over the moon as the countdown for the historic Artemis II mission commenced on March 30th, 2026. This marks the first time in 53 years that a crewed spacecraft is getting ready to leave our world behind. The 48-hour countdown clock began ticking at 4:44 p.m. Eastern Time, pointing toward a launch window that opens at 6:24 p.m. on Wednesday, April 1st. It looks like NASA isn't playing any April Fools jokes as they prepare to send Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen on a 10-day lunar flyby. This stellar crew, which includes the first woman, the first person of color, and the first non-United States citizen to visit our lunar neighbor, will be testing the Orion spacecraft's life support systems. Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson says the Space Launch System rocket is in excellent shape after crews ironed out some previous hydrogen leaks, ensuring the mission won't run out of steam before it leaves the atmosphere. This is a critical milestone for the program, serving as the final crewed test before the Artemis III landing attempts to build a more sustainable presence on the lunar surface. Meanwhile, Japan is striking a new chord in its defense policy. The Defense Ministry officially deployed its first long-range missiles with counter-strike capabilities on March 31, 2026. This includes the upgraded Type 25 surface-to-ship missile at Camp Kengan and new hypervelocity gliding projectiles at Camp Fuji. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi says the move is aimed at strengthening deterrence in a complex security environment, as these weapons have a 1,000-kilometer range that can reach mainland China and North Korea. While the government wants to stay on target with its defense goals, local residents are up in arms, staging protests over concerns that their homes might become military bullseyes. This rollout will continue with more systems heading to Hokkaido and Miyazaki by 2028, while United States-made Tomahawk missiles are expected to arrive on the destroyer JS Chokai later this year. In a move that has many people hanging on every word of the legal text, the Israeli Knesset passed a highly controversial law mandating the death penalty for deadly terrorist acts. Supported by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the legislation passed with a vote of 62 to 48. The law stipulates execution by hanging for those convicted in military courts, specifically targeting West Bank Palestinians. With no right to appeal or clemency, the government is also barred from releasing these inmates in future prisoner swaps. While proponents say this will deter violence, critics and international allies worry the law is hanging by a thread of legality and could trigger a new wave of unrest. Shifting to Eastern Europe, the Kremlin is railroading its way into a permanent presence in occupied Ukrainian territories. Investigations show Moscow is funneling $11.8 billion into a massive infrastructure overhaul. This Novorossiya plan includes the Azov Ring, a 1,400-kilometer highway, and a 525-kilometer railway designed to bypass the vulnerable Crimean Bridge. By auctioning off resources, like the Bobrikivska gold mine, Russia is trying to dig in its heels and make the occupation irreversible. Finally, the United States Small Business Administration is drawing a hard line in the sand, barring green card holders from its primary lending programs. As of March 1, 2026, the agency requires 100% of a business's owners to be United States citizens or nationals. Administrator Kelly Loeffler says the goal is to prioritize American job creators, but the policy shift is leaving roughly 220,000 green card-holding business owners in California feeling a bit shortchanged. Advocacy groups warn this could force immigrant entrepreneurs to swim with the loan sharks as they lose access to safe, government-guaranteed financing. The ban was expanded on March 9 to include the agency's surety bond and microloan programs. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.